Welcome back to the First Team. I am Joe DeLeone, and joining me as always, my good friend and NFL draft analyst, Ryan Roberts. Today, we're doing another NFL draft mailbag. Haven't done these in a couple of weeks. We're back here. I don't know if we're going to do one when we go to the NFL Combine.
Oh, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. It's going to happen. Let's do it.
Okay, well, with that enthusiastic of a claim, then obviously we must do a mailbag from the Combine. Getting a table is to be determined. We're still working on that. And if we get the table, that will certainly make things a lot easier. Mailbag today, we're going to talk a little bit about the biggest things that we're paying attention to going into the 2024 NFL Combine, biggest storylines, things to watch, all of that good stuff before we get to the questions. And I want to just quickly share with you folks a quick word from our friends over at Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be your number one source for all of your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. If you're like me and you get really bored during the off season and you look for something to bet on, I try to stay away from betting on the draft and anything like that because logic completely goes out the window. I have found a nice little pocket of college basketball teams and games that I like to bet on, and you can go and do that over at Bet Online. Head to Bet Online today to become part of the team. And remember to use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet Online, the game starts here. All right, Ryan, 2024 NFL Combine. Did a radio spot yesterday and was asked a ton about what to expect from the Combine, who are going to be some of these top performers, who could maybe even be weak performers. I want to kick it to you first here on anybody that you are interested or things that you're interested in following and tracking.
Well, I think the first thing is that we have a really good talent at the top of the pass catching class, right? And I'm going to kind of lump tight ends and wide receivers together because, of course, we have Brock Bowers out of Georgia at tight end who is alone at the top of his class, right? Like tight end 1 to tight end 2 is a chasm this year. Like there is such a huge difference from tight end 1 to tight end 2. Joe, I don't know if you agree with this, but this is my opinion, is that tight end, the drop off from the first ranked guy to the second ranked guy is the largest gap in any position group this year by far, in my opinion, right? So I'm going to group him in with Marvin Harrison Jr., with Malik Nabers, with Brian Thomas, with Rome Odunze, with the top pass catchers in the class. And my first thought is, and my first question is, and we fight with this every single year, is who's going to test, right? That's the first starting point, is who's going to test. We know they're going to be there. We know that they're going to interview. We know they're going to do medicals, but who is going to go out there, run their 40, do their verts? And of these top three, I'm especially intrigued because Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't have to test, right?
Yeah.
Brock Bowers doesn't have to test. But then after that, does Malik Nabers feel like it's needed to test? Does Brian Thomas? Because I think that we've kind of settled into this little bit of a wavelength as far as Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver 1. And then I think most people have Malik Nabers at wide receiver 2, but I don't think that that's like a foregone conclusion yet. I do think that Malik Nabers has some things to solidify this week. So is he pressed to test because Brian Thomas is going to test, because Rome Odunze is going to test, because some of these others, wide receiver 3, 4, 5 in this class, could potentially vault themselves up to wide receiver 2 at the end of the day. So which top of pass catchers end up testing this week? Because you could argue that tight end 1 and wide receiver 1 are solidified. But I would even argue that if Brock Bowers chose to test, Joe, and he was just insane dominant, right? Why can't he be the second pass catcher off the board above a Malik Nabers? Like those things are all on the table this week in an interesting storyline that I'm very curious to see how it plays out.
I'm curious your thoughts on this. I think this is a very unique perspective. I always just come into the week for over the past couple of years, and I'm going to stand by this for the rest of my career covering the draft. I always just assume that the top guy or even top 2 guys at every position are just not going to test. Now, I'm obviously not going to say that for like linebacker or running back. Those positions are going to probably still test because there's not really a first round guy. But for me, I don't expect Caleb Williams to test. We don't know. I don't expect Drake Maye to test, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brock Bowers, Joe Alt. I don't know why. I can't explain it, but there's just been this recent expectation, it feels like, where it's a 50-50 shot if the top player coming into the week at the position, if he is going to perform during the NFL combine drills. Because more
True.
often than not, and it's good advice, their trainers and their coaches, sorry, not their coaches, their agents are telling them, look, you really don't have anything to gain here. If you want to go out there and
Right.
compete, go ahead. But
Mhm.
you are already establishing yourself as this top premier player in the class. Don't go out there and lose anything because you're going to get compared to some of these other guys. Just maybe test at your pro day when you feel more comfortable with it, but go do the meetings, get in and out. But
Yeah.
you brought up Brian Thomas Jr. And I immediately brought this up when I did my radio hit on Sirius yesterday, that I think the guy that has the most to gain is Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver from LSU. I brought him up when we did our combine freaks team. 6'4", 205 pounds, could run in the low 4.4s. Maybe we get blessed with him running even faster than that, and he runs in the 4.3s. He's going to jump crazy numbers. The hosts of the show were actually kind of surprised I went as far as to say this. I wouldn't be shocked if he doesn't have such a good performance that some teams don't say, let's move this guy up to wide receiver 2. There is always
Sure.
one athletic freak in the receiver room that is good enough to push himself up and say, well, we really like Malik Nabers, but holy crap, look at the ceiling and the traits and
Right.
the what he brings to the table. If we can
Mhm.
unlock that, we're going to have an elite receiver in the NFL.
Well, and that was my point, is that I think that so obviously guys are going to be more pressed to wanting to test if there is not a huge separation there, right? Like, because I think that most people have just kind of have Malik Nabers penciled in as wide receiver too, and I completely get it. Malik Nabers is a really good prospect, but why can't a Dunze challenge him, right? If he is just because what is the difference between Roma Dunze and Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Nabers, Joe? Malik Nabers is going to come in at like 5'11" and some change, right? Like, he's a little bit of a smaller receiver. Roma Dunze isn't. He's going to be over 6'3". Brian Thomas is going to be over 6'3". These are going to be some freak show athletes, I think, as well. So kind of jockeying for that wide receiver 2 conversation is very interesting. It's always going to come down to risk versus reward, right? Because I think that the risk that Marvin Harrison has on the table is a lot higher than what Malik Nabers has, right? Because there is someone that can touch you. There is someone that can press you to be in that top guy on the board. That's why I don't necessarily think that Brock Bowers is going to test. But I will say this, is that if we're grouping these guys as pass catchers, Brock Bowers does have something to gain, because he can say, hey, dude, I am the second pass catcher off this board, regardless of the
That's a
tight
very
end or
good
wide
point.
receiver label, right? Like, he has that opportunity to be that guy. But I love the mention of Brian Thomas Jr. For folks out there that have not watched him too much, he's number 11 wide receiver from LSU, true junior that came out 6'4", 205 pounds, right around 200 pounds. He apparently is going to run most likely in the mid 4.3s and is going to be just an absolute insane tester. You know who he kind of reminds me of from a testing perspective, Joe? Not as a player. I think he's a much better prospect than this player. But DJ Chark, when he came out, was that dude, man. He was a height, weight, speed freak. And I think those testing
That's
numbers
actually
should be
not a
very
bad
similar for
that's
Brian
actually not a
Thomas.
bad comp, because DJ Chark, for the early part of his career, everyone was like, this guy is a physical specimen. Like, this guy can
Yes.
move at an unbelievable
Yeah.
wavelength that other guys can't. And if he hits his ceiling, he could be a really good receiver. And we started to see it in spurts, but it never really truly panned out.
Because
I,
he
I,
got
I actually
banged up
don't.
and everything. And
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Who was the other LSU receiver that was a really good athlete that was on the Panthers?
The other LSU receiver that went to the Panthers, Ruben Randall, I think, was on the
No, no,
Panthers
no.
at one
Wait, maybe not
point. He
the
wasn't.
Maybe not the Panthers. There was
Okay.
another guy a couple of years, like this was after all
Hmm.
those crazy guys came out, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, but he was a part of that
Okay.
grouping.
So
This
more
is gonna
recently? Oh, you're talking about, oh,
he went
dang,
the
dude. He was
second round.
he was actually the highest ranked of those guys, which is pretty hilarious. Terrace Marshall. Terrace Marshall was
Yes,
the guy you're talking about. Yeah.
yes. So
Yeah.
I feel like
Athletically,
he could
maybe. I don't know.
he could
Yeah.
be Terrace Marshall if Terrace Marshall panned out. There's just a lot of this is why receiver scouting is really tricky, because there's a lot of guys that you can talk about that can be elite, but just don't really
Sure.
get there. There's so many variables that come into play that I feel like
Yeah.
nobody discusses at the receiver position, because They need to be in a good offense that knows how to use them. They need to
Yep.
be with a good offensive coordinator that's creative. And sometimes these guys go to run first schemes and they're completely abandoned. And they also need quarterbacks who are moderately competent. It's really crazy the pendulum swing of the capabilities of these guys' careers.
So let me ask you, Joe. I'm going to read you DJ Chark's numbers coming out in his combine and tell me if these could be comparable to your boy Brian Thomas. Okay, so he was 6'2" and 7/8, so right, a hair under 6'3". Brian
Okay.
Thomas would be probably be taller than that, but 199 pounds, 79-inch wingspan. He ran 4.34 at the combine, had a 40-inch vert and a 10.9 broad jump.
40-inch vert, you said? Yeah, I think that sounds
40-inch
exactly
vert.
like him.
Yeah, yeah, and 1.51 10-yard split. So he was, decent starter, but more than anything, he was a long strider, which I think is exactly what Brian Thomas is. So
DJ,
yep.
Or not DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall was 6'2.5", 205 pounds. 4.4 40-yard dash, 39-inch vertical. And then his broad was 125 inches. So, I mean, they're all kind of in the same hilarious grouping. Yeah, that they're all LSU receivers and they're all very similar.
That's hilarious.
Actually, you know who the first person on Mock Draftable that shows up right underneath Terrace Marshall is it's DJ Chark is the next comparison.
Yeah. That's hilarious. That's absolutely hilarious. Yeah, I mean, LSU definitely has a type, right? Like a wide receiver, and I get it, right? Like long, athletic, straight line speed. Like who wouldn't want that type of combination? Here's one, Joe. You mentioned this player as a person that probably won't test. I'm going to make a case that they will test, and I want to hear if you think that I am correct and on my logic here, okay? There is an assumption, and I get it. Notre Dame offensive tackle Joe Alt will not test or doesn't have to test. My argument would be that he should test, and this is why. One, I think that right now he is the favorite to be the first offensive tackle off the board, but I would not say that that is 100% solidified. I think there's still a world where a team could talk themselves into Olu Fashanu or even Amarius Mims, potentially. I think that there's a world that could happen. And I don't know if you've heard this, but I've literally seen this on Twitter. It is getting over the top, in my opinion. There is an assumption that Joe Alt is not a very good athlete. Like he's a good, solid athlete, but he's not a great athlete. It's out there, man. It's so out there,
I've seen it. I've seen it. The TikTok analysts say that he's not a good athlete.
Joe, I've even seen. I would even say this though. I have seen some more prominent mainstream analysts phrase Joe Alt this way: very high floor, rock steady, doesn't lose many reps, and they just do that cliche thing where they basically are saying that like he's just a really good player, but maybe not the most best athlete of all time, not the most explosive athlete of all time. And I think people forget that Joe Alt at 6'8", 322 pounds was a high school tight end. And I think that we forget how athletic that young man is. So I think that he has a chance to go to the combine and shut those things off and make sure that you understand that, like, hey, bro, this isn't just a technician that isn't a very good athlete. This is the full package. He's got the genetics. He's got the backgrounds. I think for me that if Joe Alt goes to the combine, he can shut off any of those naysayers in any of those conversations. I would not be shocked if at 320 pounds, he runs around a 5 flat or sub 5. Like, I think that he has that potential in him with how athletic he is. I think Joe Alt should test in Indianapolis. I think he should, and I think that he can kind of put that final stamp on he's OT1. Stop overthinking this guy.
Yeah, but I love all that. But at the same time, he's only proving wrong a couple media idiots. I feel like the NFL is confident in him.
Joe, I think you're giving the NFL evaluators a little too much credit, man. A little too much credit.
You're right.
We've seen reports out there all the time, not even just Joe Alt-centric, but read reports where you're just like, seriously? Like, a scout thinks that? Like, they said that. And even if it's anonymous, you're just like, huh. I don't think scouts are infallible at all. I think that there's a lot of bad, and this is all due respect. I think there's some bad NFL scouts out there. There's some really good ones, of course. There's some solid ones, but I do think there's some bad ones that have watched Joe Alt and think that he's a good athlete, but not a special athlete. And in a class where behind him, he has Olu Fashanu out of Penn State that is probably going to be a dynamic tester. Amarius Mims out of Georgia that I would be surprised if he wasn't a dynamic tester. I think Joe Alt has a chance to kind of shut off that conversation and be like, guys, you've underrated my athleticism. I showed it to you. Not only am I a technician, not only have I played a ton of football, but I'm also a great tester. And I'm also a great athlete. And we can just have that kind of easy offensive tackle one conversation down the stretch of this cycle.
This guy's stroking my ego big time. Thanks, Irish Lou. I do get that comp a lot. We talk a lot of NFL draft comps. I get a lot of Taron Egerton comps. I used to have from the movie Kingsman. I got distracted. I always get distracted when this gets brought up. Movie Kingsman. He had much more thicker framed glasses than I used to. I wear the same glasses, so I used to get that a lot more often. Back to football. I do see what you're saying though. I would love to see Joe Alt test. I would absolutely love. I think that would really, really put on a show. And I think that we'd stop hearing a lot of those doubts as you're talking about him athletically. I want to throw out there two names and this is a very different angle to take here. Two names that I don't think are going to test well, but could and will shut me up if they do. Okay.
Yep.
More so. Two guys that I want to see if they're more athletic. Didn't mean to throw that on the screen again. If they're more athletic,
you're just stroking your ego more.
I pushed the enter key on when I was trying to move something. Two guys that I want to see if they're more athletic than I expect, but at the same time, I think could calm some of the hype that they're receiving. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., the linebacker from Clemson, and T'Vondre Sweat, the defensive tackle from Texas. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is potentially going to measure in sub 6 foot. He's probably not going to have super long arms.
Around 6 foot.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
He's probably not going to have super long arms. And if there is a world where his jumps, his 40-yard dash is on the slower side, and if his short area stuff is not great, I think I feel a little bit more justified. I'm going to go as far as say this. I have a top 200 grade on Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I have seen so many people place this guy as the number one linebacker in the class, and I do not see it. I see a guy with limited length, limited athleticism, and average eyes. I've seen some people hype up the guy and say that, well, his vision is the best amongst the group. I really don't think that there is much separation, and I'd much rather take a guy that's not far off in terms of instincts that is a much better athlete. And there's a lot of guys that are better athletes, like Tyrese Knight, who we interviewed, like Junior Colson, like Edgerrin Cooper. There's so many better options. Peyton Wilson. Right. So like, I would like to be proven wrong here and him come out and be this mighty mouse of an electric athlete at the NFL Combine, but I'm not holding my breath. T'Vondre Sweat, before I let you hop in here.
Yep.
There is a pocket, and this is an analyst. This is just like, I feel like a lot of fans think that T'Vondre Sweat is Jordan Davis. I feel like a lot of people believe that this is going to be an athletic freak, but I think he's more closer to Sione Vaki from last year, who is just a big
Sione Vaki. Talking about
or not Sione Vaki.
That's a safety. Wait.
Who's
Siaki Ika?
Siaki Ika. Yeah. Sorry, my apologies.
He's a safety.
Yeah. Ika, who was this just massive human being who didn't test very well, and I would love for T'Vondre Sweat to test as a good athlete, and I think I'd maybe feel very differently about him if he tests better than I expect. But I don't have that high of an expectation for him because he does not show me a lot of that Jordan Davis on film. He shows me more of, this is an early down guy I have to take off the field on third down.
Joe, I remember this summer, I liked T'Vondre Sweat, I think, a little bit more than you, but we were in the same boat as far as like, what are we doing here? And I feel exactly the same as I did then, and his tape was better in 2023 than it was in 2022. Don't get me wrong. He was a good player in 2023, but I can get that style and I can get that impact in almost every round. There is nothing unique about this player other than him being 360 pounds. And that's not a skill. It's not a skill. Right. I can easily bulk someone up to be fat if I wanted to, right? All due respect to T'Vondre Sweat. He is not a gifted athlete. He's not a one-gap penetrator. He's not even going to push the pocket consistently, man. Like, he's just a really good early down run defender, which is fine. That has a role in the NFL. But I'm seeing people say first-round pick T'Vondre Sweat. Like, fellas, what are we doing? what are we actually doing? I don't understand where we're going with that at all. It is the weirdest thing in the world. I'm with you also on the Jeremiah Trotter Jr. stuff. I live right outside of Philadelphia. So every Eagles fan that calls into WIP here in Philadelphia is like, I want Jeremiah Trotter Jr. because of obviously his dad's time with the Philadelphia Eagles. I want that guy. All right, man. Well, at the end of the day, I think that Jeremiah Trotter Jr. has a lot on the line in Indianapolis, man. He's got to test well, Joe. Because to your point, he is a little bit undersized. He doesn't have great length. He needs to overcompensate with that in other ways. And I didn't see that overcompensating range on tape. So hopefully he shows out a little bit and shows that, like, hey, true junior. So maybe there's a step up he can take. Maybe there's a jump. Maybe there's explosiveness he can add. I doubt it, but that's what the Indianapolis is for, is to try to show that, hey, maybe there's a little bit more in the tank than we gave it credit for first time on film. And I hope he makes me go back to the film and be like, oh, better athlete than I actually thought. I hope that we get that conversation with Jeremiah Trotter. I have my doubts though. My last one.
Oh yeah, go ahead. No, all I was going to finish that point up with Trotter. If he tests really well, I'll eat my words. Again, there is value in, and I called him, Mighty Mouse. There's value in having, in the modern NFL, having these smaller linebackers that are really quick and that move really well. And maybe he was just hampered by the scheme that he was in, which I don't think was necessarily possible. But if he moves well and he runs a good 40, I would willingly move him up a little bit over some guys. But I just don't see that athleticism on tape. And there's a lot of guys, a lot of linebackers that I have ranked ahead of him because they are significantly better athletes.
Agreed. And like you said, I don't think he's like this crazy tester where he's going to just I don't think that he's this crazy processor where it's just like he can completely overcompensate for being just an average to below average athlete. I agree with you there. My last one, and this is more not a testing one because we're going to hyper focus on the testing, but I think people also need to remember that week in Indianapolis is about a lot of different things. It's not just testing, meeting with teams, medicals, media availability. It's a daunting week for these players that are going to be in Indianapolis for like the 3 days. I think they're in total there for like 3 full days or something like that for each group, that is. And a big part of it, and we always hear things coming out of this week as far as fallers in the class, is what the medicals look like. And every single year, there's medicals that are flagged, there's medicals that are passed, and all those miscellaneous things of question marks going into that week always need to be answered. And there are 3 players in specific that I want to see what the medicals look like. And we're not going to have complete access to this week, but we'll start hearing some rumblings, right? Like, what are the scouts saying? What are the medical clearing? And where do guys rising? Are they falling? And we kind of, determine as far as like what the medicals look like. 2 that we've talked ad nauseum. One's Peyton Wilson from NC State, the linebacker who's had multiple shoulder injuries as a linebacker. That's a little bit troubling. He's also had an ACL tear. So just overall, what do those medicals look like? The other is Michael Penix Jr., who's the quarterback out of Washington, who's had 3 season-ending injuries in his college career, 2 ACL tears, and a shoulder injury as well. So that's a little concerning, obviously. And the last one is Karan Abingaji, who is the offensive tackle out of Yale. Yeah. Now, we'll see what the severity of it is, Joe, but he did have a quad injury that needed surgery, and he missed all but 4 games of his senior year, and he wasn't able to participate in the All-Star circuit, obviously, so he's still recovering. And quad injuries, scary, right? Like, that's a pretty scary thing for me, especially for a guy that is over 320 pounds. Can he come back? What does he look like? We don't really know the answer to Karan Abingaji right now, but he's certainly one of the more talented offensive linemen in the 2024 class, and I'm hoping that he passes the medicals down in Indianapolis.
Yeah, Abingaji is one who has not really been available, and he's probably not going to test. So to know that there is no concern there, I think is really great for him. I also, Michael Penix, Laiatu Latu, they have...
Laiatu Latu is a good one too. I forgot about him. Yep.
A lot of older injuries that I feel like we don't have a ton of context on the severity and how much it's going to hold them, the both of them back. Those are 2 guys I think specifically are possibly could be like late first rounders if everything goes according to plan. Latu more than Penix. But if things don't go well, it could completely tank their draft stock. So,
It really can.
definitely,
M-
yeah, really,
My
really hope that doesn't happen.
my last 2 mock drafts, I have had Laiatu Latu going number 21 overall to the Miami Dolphins in back-to-back mocks. I really think I love the fit. I think he's a really nuanced football player. I have questioned as far as like the overall athleticism, but overall, the biggest thing that's hanging over Leo Tulatu's head, because he is a ready-made NFL pass rusher, is he had to medically retire while he was at Washington originally, right? Because of the neck injury. So is he able to just pass those medicals and have no long-term concerns? We will see hopefully shortly, but we'll definitely see down the stretch of the draft process, if nothing else.
All right, we're going to get to some of these questions now. First question from Brian Maffey. Day 3 safety sleepers. First of all, safety class Garbo, terrible. Not a good class at all.
Yep.
What about Malik Mustafa, the Wake Forest safety that you and I were talking about last night?
Yeah.
Like, that's the first one that comes to mind, where he's not very big. He might not test super well, but he hits people really hard. So like, he could be a guy who sticks on a roster for a very long time.
This sounds like such a neat
Neanderthal.
I can't Neanderthal. I can't say the word Nathaniel. Oh my god, what the heck is happening? I can't say the word. A Neanderthal thing to say is that me hit hard, right? But like he does hit hard. And I was actually watching him a ton last night because we had the interview with Kalen Carson, obviously last night. That'll be out on the channel pretty soon. But he was speaking heavy volumes about Malik, I guess is how you actually pronounce it, not Malik, and just kind of the intangibles that he brings to the game. Incredibly hardworking kid, incredibly physical, brings pretty good explosiveness to the table. And I must say, man, he's a pretty good. I mean, well, he's a really good downhill thumper. I mean, he despite being a smaller guy, he really does play very well in the box and make a ton of plays. I would say this too, Joe, is we don't know exactly where some of these guys are going to go. It'll be dependent upon how they test. But if Jaden Hicks out of Washington State makes it to the 4th round somehow, which
Yeah, that one
it's
popped in my
possible,
head.
dude. Man, I like Jaden Hicks a lot, man. He's inconsistent with his processing, but 6'2" plus, 210 plus pounds, really physical, really good downhill range. I think there's a little bit of limitations from range from depth, but that
Yeah.
kid is a modern day strong safety that I think could bring a lot of really nice things to the table. So he would be one guy that I would just quickly shout out. I'm looking down my list as far as like guys that I may be able to, I would pound the table for on day 3, because I think that's kind of where this question's coming from a little bit more. One that's like a worthy of maybe a 6th or 7th round conversation that I don't know if you've even seen, Joe, but I do like Patrick McMorris, that was originally at San Diego State and did a Cal this past year. 3 years ago, or actually, 2 years ago, I guess technically, 2021, Patrick McMorris was excellent for San Diego State. Excellent. 2022 season, missed way too many tackles, was very inconsistent. 2023, I felt like we split the difference a little bit. He went from maddeningly inconsistent in 2023. I'm sorry, he went from very good in 2021 to maddeningly inconsistent in 2022, and I thought he was good in 2023. Now, he may never be a starting caliber safety, but if you get Patrick McMorris out of Cal in the 6th to 7th round, I think he could stick, man, because he's a hitter. He has enough instincts. I just think he's got a little bit of a make it feel to his game potentially.
Mm. A lot of very deep pull on that last one there. Yeah, I'm going to be very, very honest here. I have
Yes.
spent probably the least amount of time. There's 2 position groups I've like just deliberately said I really don't care: safety and running back, because I'm just going to get to them later on. Because
Dude.
again, there's nothing sexy about either of those groups this year. They're fine. Sure. They're fine. There's some decent players. There's so much more better talent across the board in some of these other position groups. Andre Tonsil,
Yes.
who are 3 players who will rise in the NFL draft that no one is talking about? Let's just do one who we think is going to be a riser.
Man, that's a great question, Andre, because it's so open ended. I would rather him almost ask me who is one player from a specific position that could be a big riser in the class. I've mentioned one a ton, so I'll stick with it, I guess. Theo Johnson out of Penn State, I think from the media side is going to be a big riser, because tight end 3 is wide open, man. It really is. Like, you have Brock Bowers as the quintessential tight end 1 in this class. Then you have Jatavion Sanders out of Texas, who's probably tight end 2 and probably a 2nd round player. But then who's 3? Is it Cade Stover? Is it, there's a bunch of guys that are kind of in that like weird grouping there, but there's not a clear answer. And I think that Theo Johnson, when he goes to the combine and runs high 4.4, 4.5 flat, somewhere in that ballpark at 6'6", 250 pounds, I think he could end up being a top 64 pick when all is said and done, because people are going to bet on that athleticism and that upside. So I'll go with Theo Johnson as my riser out of nowhere following the combine.
I wouldn't say that this is out of nowhere, but I'm going to throw in there. I think that Tyler Guyton, the tackle from Oklahoma,
Oh, that's not out of nowhere,
I
Joe.
know. Well, that's
Come
what I'm
on,
saying. That's not out of
man.
nowhere, but like
Boring.
has been rising and could find himself like locked
Sure.
in the end of the first round, because like his film probably isn't as comparable to some of the other guys that are in that conversation of late first round.
Yep.
But what
Mhm.
is going to help his case is if he shows up and he tests out of the, as one of the best tackles, which I think he's going to do. I really think that he is going to physically test as one of the best tackles.
Can I throw out one extra one? It was a guy
Yeah.
that I actually talked about on a radio spot recently, because this similar question was actually asked. Austin Booker, edge out of Kansas, I think is a player at 6'4.5", 250 pounds, 34-inch arms. That kid, I'm told, is going to be a historical tester. Like, he's going to do some silly things at his size. So just keep an eye on Austin Booker, who has already started his rise. He came into the Senior Bowl as a kind of a toolsy, who's that guy type of player out of Kansas, but then he had a pretty good week and showed a lot of traits. I think when he has a great, I was told by a scout, Joe, that they don't think that Austin Booker is going to get out of the top 2 rounds. Like, so there's some
Wow.
heat behind Austin Booker out of Kansas. So I think he continues his rise after his performance in Indianapolis.
Next question from Brett. Who are the top press man corners in the 2024 class? The two that come to mind like immediately without like thinking further.
Sure.
Nate Wiggins, because of his length. And then I think that
Yep.
just like Kool-Aid McKinstry just has such tremendous technique and just understanding of how to play the position so well. So the two of them are very, that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, Kool-Aid's number one for me. He is. It's an easy evaluation as far as press man goes, because he's a kid that has the athletic traits that you look for, right? He's got a good size profile. He's a good athlete overall. Pretty good short area. Long speed's good. It's requisite, right? But then his technique is very good, and it shouldn't be any surprise. Nick Saban has been notorious for being one of the best cornerback developers in all of college football, right? Over his time, even as a head coach or DC or anything in between. So, yeah, Kool-Aid McKinstry would be number one. I think there's a bunch of other guys that have flashes of being really good. Like, I think Kalen Carson out of Wake Forest has flashes of being good. It just, he wasn't asked to do it a ton at Wake Forest, but he has the requisite athleticism and physicality to be good at it. You mentioned Nate Wiggins. Tyrion Arnold is a little bit of a mix and match guy, but I think that he has upside as a press man corner as well. But I think Kool-Aid is the easiest answer there for me.
I think you also mentioned Tyrion Arnold
Yes.
as somebody who fits into that equation. I mean, it's crazy this year. There's just a lot of really good corners, and I think very rarely I think we have so many guys consistently good enough to be brought up as man corners, because like a lot of times as we start to move past 5 in the top rankings, like you start to sprinkle in these zone specific guys. Like TJ Tampa probably would be higher in a different class if it wasn't for how much
you think
depth.
Like I wouldn't say he's like a full press man corner, TJ Tampa, because he's more of a zone based guy. But like I could see.
I think he's more of a zone guy. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you a question though. Is that yes, in a press man system, he's definitely not that guy. But I could see TJ Tampa being a press bail guy. As far as like bailing into zones and doing that type of stuff. Like he can still be disruptive at the line of scrimmage, because he does have a lot of length that he brings to the table.
Yeah, I brought him up more so saying that he feels very zone heavy, and in a normal year he might get drafted higher. But because we've got all these guys that float ahead of him that are going to be just really good press man guys. Matt Robinson asks, if you were forced to start a day 3 offensive tackle day 1, who are you betting on? Oh, it's a good one.
I didn't see this question, man. I am not prepared at all. Let me pull up my offensive tackle list, and then we can have that conversation, man. That's a great question, dude. I got one immediately off the top of my head without even looking at my list, Joe. I'm not like super high on this player, because I do think he's just like a very limited player, and he's kind of a power-based system type of dude. But Javon Foster from Missouri for me is like one guy where if he has to start in the relative near future, I don't think he's going to kill you, right? Like, even if it's left tackle or right tackles, he has experience mostly at left tackle at Missouri. He's just a physically solid dude, right? So Javon Foster would be one where I'm just like, he could do it if you need him to do it. I don't necessarily
I
think that
think
you
of
want him to do it, but yeah,
I think of Matt Goncalves from Pitt is like one
it's
that
a good
like
one.
pops in my head. Like where yeah, he's got good film, he's steady.
Yep.
His ceiling is not very high. He's probably at his ceiling because he's an older player too. But like I wouldn't be shocked if you're like, crap, our right tackle's down. Matt, you're gonna start,
Right.
you're gonna start week one, and he
Yep.
goes somewhere in the fourth round. I think that like he's one of those guys that just like really, really stands out to me.
Yep. So Matt Goncalves, I said Javon Foster. I'm trying to see if there's anybody else that I would have in that bucket. I think Javon Foster is like a guy that's just he is what he is. To your point, like I don't think he's
Yeah.
going to get a ton better, but he can definitely do it. I mean, according to PFF and stuff, Roger Rosengarten's a day 3 player, so that would be my actual pick is Roger Rosengarten.
All right. Well,
But
he's not going to be
I
when
know,
it's
man. I
all
know.
said and done. Talk about a guy who
Yes.
might test well and really help himself. Is Roger Rosengarten?
Yeah, I think he's gonna test just good everywhere, right? Like I think we're gonna
Yeah.
we underestimate those offensive tackles. He's kind of in the similar bucket of Joe Alt, where it's like he makes everything look kind of really easy, so people think that he's not incredibly explosive and stuff. And I'm just like, guys, I just think you're underestimating just how controlled and smooth the player is sometimes. Like the kid could play without
Well,
question.
smoothness and control is always undervalued. It's completely
Yes.
overlooked, and Amarius Mims is the highest ceiling tackle of the group, but
Yep.
like his what he puts on tape is obviously going to get people more riled up than what Joe Alt puts on tape, which is just
Yep.
good rep, good rep, good rep. Instead of
Good rep.
Amarius Mims, who is I'm going to kill this guy in front of me, and you guys are going to enjoy it. That's the
You know,
that's
what's
the
so
difference.
what's so funny about Joe Alt, Joe, is that I feel like you can remember his bad reps so much because there's very few of them. So it's like, have you ever seen the movie Miracle about
Yeah.
the 1980 Olympic hockey team? You remember when they were talking about that Triniak, the goalie or whatever? They're like, if you get a goal past that guy, keep the puck because it doesn't happen very often. That's how I feel about Joe Alt. It's like, oh wow, Joe Alt gave up a pressure. Doesn't happen very often, dude. Like you need to remember that rep, and we certainly do remember those couple reps Joel gives up, just a
And
couple.
I think that's why I've seen some media folks like hyper fixate on some of those reps and try to use that as a knock on him. It's like it feels like it stands out to you, but again,
Yeah,
those are such rarities where he doesn't have the best of reps, and like that was why before I came into his film, I even said this
yeah,
to you, and you gave me shit for it. Why I coming into watching his film, I was like, well, it felt like he didn't have that great of a like as good of a year this year, just from watching the games and like remembering to
sure.
like a couple important games where Joel got beat and it was in an important spot or he didn't look as
Well,
clean.
you tried bringing up a rep against who was it, Duke? I can't remember where literally his guard tripped him, and you're like, oh man, he gave it
But
up. I'm like,
we
Joe,
watch the broadcast and we don't even know that stuff. That's the
I
thing.
got
You
you,
don't
man.
even
I
notice it
got you.
until you sit there and watch the L22. So we don't have any more Twitter questions today, but we've got a couple comments and questions in the chat. Our good friend
Okay.
Jamie Williams. I think the Bills might be leaning wide receiver, but what does the cornerback safety market look like for this draft? That's another position of need. I mean, we've discussed here, there are a lot of really talented corners for them to get on day two.
Yep.
Limited options for them at safety. I will say, if we're talking specifically first round, if they do go safety, maybe they miss out on some of the receivers that they wanted. I would say Cooper DeJean, who could play multiple roles, or Cam Kitchens is worth, I
Cam,
think, bringing up
yeah.
as an option for them.
Cam Kit, if you're looking at first round, Jamie, the only guy that I would even consider in the first round out of a true safety is Cam Kitchens, right? Because I still do consider Cooper DeJean a corner that can play safety. Like there's a little bit of a difference there. Cam Kitchens is the only one that I think could be worthy of a first round pick with the range and the ball skills and the center field potential that he has playing the safety position. Other than that, if you get on to day two and maybe you get a Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota, like that type of dude,
Yeah,
I
he's
I
fine.
think yeah, it's fine. The trouble is that those guys run out very quickly in this draft, though. So if you don't get Cam Kitchens or Tyler Nubin or even Jaden Hicks out of Washington State's a kid I like,
Javon
even though he's not a
Bullard,
true center fielder, Javon Bullard, who's a nickel safety
slot
hybrid type of
safety.
player,
Yeah.
you're in a tough spot there, right? Like you're in a little bit of a tough spot. But cornerback, I mean, you can get a guy almost every round. I mean, it's that deep of a class this year.
Yeah, there are going to be so many options for them to get to. Joe Garish throws in there. I'd love to see Isaiah Fonze make it somewhere. For those wondering
Ooh.
who the heck is that, former Montana State running back, ended up at. Did he end up at San Jose State or did he not end up playing there? But he finished his career at Cal. Had played
Yep.
football for a million years. Was really fun to watch. I think we had him on this channel. You interviewed him.
Yeah, man, I interviewed Isaiah. Yep, I did.
If there's like a Jaleel McLaughlin type guy that just finds his way onto a roster and has like a random good game and everyone's like, wow, that was like, where'd this guy come from? I think it's
Hey,
Isaiah
man.
Fonze. I don't think he's going to get drafted though. I just don't.
No.
Even though that like not a super exciting athlete for the running back
Mhm.
position, but there is just so much of an uphill battle for a running back that has as many
Yep.
reps and carries as he does. And I believe he's had a couple of injuries in his
He
career
has.
too. That does
He
not
he
help
mi he
him.
missed time at Montana State. I was just looking up his Cal numbers this year. He averaged 5.2 a carry, had 7 touchdowns and limited opportunities behind Jaden Ott. So it's not like he wasn't productive at all. So, hey man,
Yeah.
he'll be a kid that's in a camp. There's no doubt. I think one thing that you hit on, Joe, is that there's nothing overly exciting about him. He's just kind of solid everywhere. You know,
Good vision.
Jaleel McLaughlin had some juice. Like there was
Yeah.
like things to get excited about a little bit with him. Isaiah's going to be 5'8". He's going to be
He's
205
kind of like James
pounds.
Robinson in a way.
Yeah, I can see James. James was a little bit more powerful than Isaiah
Yeah.
Fonse, though. But yes, I think that he'll be in a camp. I don't know if he has enough to stick necessarily, but certainly a very productive player during his Montana State career. And then he was productive in his limited role at Cal as well. So he'll be in a camp. We'll see if he can stick.
Migrating Coconuts. That's a wonderful name. Ryan Flournoy. We got a lot of the FCS fans on the channel have kind of snuck their
Yeah,
way
man.
in on today's stream. Ryan
Yep.
Flournoy is going to show up big at the combine. The SEMO, Southeastern Missouri wide receiver, Ryan Flournoy.
Yep.
I mean, I got to be blatantly honest here. I don't really have much context on his testing numbers. Do you
He
have anything on him?
was he at the Senior Bowl or
He
was he at the
was.
I think he was at the Senior Bowl, yeah.
He was one of the
So
few FCS guys that made the Senior Bowl, and I think he was fine. He had a couple nice reps.
yeah.
Nothing about what you would expect from a 2024 FCS player, because most of those guys had already transferred up that were good enough to be in that conversation.
So apparently he's going to test pretty well. I was actually looking at the some Blesto measurements and some estimates on actually not even estimated. He literally I don't know what he measured at the Senior Bowl, but this past spring he was 6'1" and 3/8, 197 pounds, so 6'1.5", pretty solid size. He ran 4.45 for scouts before the season, so sounds like he's going to test pretty well, man. At least he's going to have good height and he's going to be able to run pretty explosively. So he was at the Senior Bowl, so obviously there's some interest there. So we'll see. No, I mean, full transparency. I have not watched Ryan Flournoy's
Yeah,
2023 tape. I haven't.
there's a lot of receivers in this class
Yeah,
that day 3 guy though could go somewhere on day 3
possibly.
because there's opportunities if he tests as well as you just mentioned there as we're expecting. I think that's going to have
Absolutely.
to wrap us up on because we are out of questions. We're going to try for next Friday. We're going to see how that turns out at Joe Dealey. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we got to figure out a different time. I have
Did
a
you forget your
radio.
name? Did you forget your
No.
name?
I have a radio spot booked at 10 on Friday, so
Okay.
we might need to figure
Okay.
out a different time. But at Joe
Gotcha.
DeLeone, at Rise and Draft, hit the subscribe button. If you're tuning in on the audio version, please give us a 5-star review and let us know what you think of the show. We'll be back with more. Enjoy the rest of your week.